Favorite. You're telling me you're going to get CISA out of the business of policing narrative control. I mean, narrative control, good Lord. I mean, what could be more Orwellian than that? A federal government, the most powerful government in the world, engaged in narrative control? So your testimony here is that you will get CISA out of this business. You will comply with the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and you will not engage in censorship of American citizens of any kind. Am I understanding you correctly?
In today's America, one of the fiercest debates centers on the balance between cybersecurity and free speech. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, better known as CISA, was created to defend our nation against digital attacks, safeguard elections, and protect critical infrastructure. Yet in recent years, it has been accused of overstepping its mission, pressuring social media platforms, and drifting into what critics call censorship by proxy. From COVID-19 debates to election narratives, the federal government's role in shaping online discourse has raised urgent constitutional questions. At stake is not only how we secure our networks, but whether the First Amendment still stands as an absolute shield for American voices in the digital age.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you for being here. Mr. Planky, if I could just start with you. One of the most troubling things that we have seen in the last few years when it comes to behavior by the government is the effort by the federal government to coerce and otherwise pressure social media companies to engage in mass censorship of private American citizens across a range of topics: COVID-19, vaccines, elections, school board meetings. And unfortunately, the agency that you've been nominated to lead was right in the thick of it, CISA. Much to that agency's shame, I must say, and I think in direct violation of the First Amendment of the United States, because what the Supreme Court has said over and over is the federal government cannot use private entities to do what the First Amendment bars the federal government from doing. And as you probably know, there's been much litigation about this. The discovery in that litigation is damning for many agencies in the federal government, including CISA. So my question is, what are you going to do to ensure that CISA gets out of the speech regulation business, the surveillance business when it comes to private American citizens, and gets back into what it's supposed to do, which is actually to keep us safe, not to regulate our speech, not to follow us around online, but to be stopping cyber attacks and ensuring cybersecurity?
Senator, thank you for that question, which I believe to be an important one, and so does Secretary Noem and President Trump. It is not CISA's job, and nor is it in its authorities to censor or determine the truths, whether it be on social media or in any level of media. CISA will not do any of that work, will not be a part of any of that work if I am confirmed. I'd like to focus CISA on what it's mandated to do, and that's protect the federal civilian executive branch, as well as protect the critical infrastructure of the United States. Cybersecurity is a big enough problem. We have adversaries at our door, inside our house, and all over us every day. If confirmed, I need my people at CISA to be focused on eradicating those adversaries from the federal government, computer systems, as well as critical infrastructure of the United States.
Let me just read some of the euphemisms that your predecessor used to talk about CISA's mission and the censorship effort: narrative control, perception management, information integrity. That was my favorite. You're telling me you're going to get CISA out of the business of policing narrative control. I mean, narrative control, good Lord. I mean, what could be more Orwellian than that? A federal government, the most powerful government in the world, engaged in narrative control? So your testimony here is that you will get CISA out of this business. You will comply with the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and you will not engage in censorship of American citizens of any kind. Am I understanding you correctly?
Senator, to put it bluntly, yes, you are understanding me correctly.
Good. Let's talk about what that's going to look like in the election context. Obviously, CISA has important election security work, protecting our election infrastructure. That's important work. That's designated by statute. That, however, is different than monitoring political speech and monitoring political campaigns. How are you going to draw a line? Tell us how you're going to make the line clear between cybersecurity protections for our elections and political content moderation, which again is unfortunately what your agency has been involved in recent years.
Senator, thank you for that question. If confirmed, CISA's role, election security, is a subsector of critical infrastructure, and it's election infrastructure that is the piece of that. And the president has already given guidance on this in his recent executive order. That guidance says that the Department of Homeland Security will focus on electronic election system, so e.g. like a voting system, and that a American might use to vote, to ensure that it is assessed prior to an election that there is no adversarial actions or vulnerabilities in it. Now that is tasked in the president's executive order that he has already thought of, down to DHS. If Secretary Noem tasks CISA to do that, which I could imagine she likely will, my team, if confirmed, will focus on the assessments of that election infrastructure.
Good. Well, everything you said to me is encouraging. I'm glad to hear it. I know that you appreciate that CISA has a major trust deficit given what's happened in the last 4 years. And that's a problem because, we've gone so far in this body, there are tasks that frankly CISA ought to be performing, including things related to like the security of rural hospitals, which is very important to me, very important to my state. 40% of the hospitals in my state are rural. We need the cybersecurity help, but frankly, we've been very reluctant to use CISA for any of this because CISA has been a surveillance and censorship machine for the last 4 years. This has got to stop. We've got to get this agency back on track, and I hope that you're the right person to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The debate over CISA, censorship, and the First Amendment has emerged as one of the defining constitutional and political struggles of our time. At the center is a question that reaches far beyond one agency. Should the federal government, in its mission to protect national security, have any role in shaping, influencing, or policing the flow of information among its citizens? The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, better known as CISA, was created in 2018 to defend America's digital backbone, to protect the civilian executive branch of government from cyber attacks, and to help secure the critical infrastructure that allows society to function. Hospitals, pipelines, electrical grids, and election systems were meant to be its focus. But in recent years, CISA has drifted from this core mission into areas far more controversial. Instead of strictly defending networks, it began to involve itself in matters of speech, narratives, and online content. It began using language like information integrity, narrative control, and perception management to describe activities that, critics argue, amounted to monitoring political discourse and pressuring social media companies to suppress certain viewpoints. This expansion, often justified in the name of countering disinformation, has led to accusations that CISA has engaged in censorship by proxy, violating the First Amendment not through direct bans, but by encouraging or coercing private platforms to silence Americans on the government's behalf. The stakes are enormous. The First Amendment guarantees that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, and courts have long held that the government may not outsource censorship to private entities as a way of evading constitutional restrictions. What began as an effort to combat foreign interference in elections soon bled into domestic debates over COVID-19, vaccines, school board meetings, and the 2020 election. Documents revealed in litigation, including the high-profile Missouri v. Biden case, show that officials coordinated with platforms to flag posts, track narratives, and encourage takedowns. For many Americans, this was proof that CISA had become a censorship machine. The controversy has created a trust deficit that threatens the agency's legitimacy. Understanding how CISA arrived at this point requires tracing its evolution. Originally conceived as a cybersecurity shield, its mission was purely technical: defend federal networks from hacks, help protect private sector infrastructure from ransomware, and safeguard the machinery of elections, databases, tabulators, voting machines from foreign attack. But after the Russian disinformation campaigns of 2016, the government became intensely focused on narratives. CISA established a Countering Foreign Influence task force intended to expose and neutralize hostile foreign actors. The logic seemed reasonable. If adversaries like Russia or China were seeding false narratives through fake accounts, the government had a role in identifying those operations. The difficulty came in drawing lines. Soon, the task force was not just exposing fake accounts, but also flagging narratives that, though originating with Americans, resembled those pushed by foreign adversaries. By the time the pandemic arrived, this scope had expanded further. Posts about vaccines, lockdowns, masks, school reopenings, and election practices were subject to monitoring. CISA officials held regular meetings with social media companies, flagged content for review, and tracked how narrative spread. Whether officials called it information integrity or perception management, the result was the same. The government was involving itself in regulating the flow of ideas. This presented a constitutional problem. The Supreme Court has consistently ruled that government may not abridge free speech except under very narrow conditions such as incitement, true threats, or obscenity. In Bantam Books v. Sullivan, the court held that even informal government pressure on private distributors to suppress content was unconstitutional. If CISA was telling social media companies which posts to remove, or even strongly suggesting it, that activity may well fall under the category of unconstitutional coercion. Critics argue that the distinction between cooperation and coercion collapses when the government is involved. A suggestion from Washington carries the weight of authority that cannot be ignored. In effect, Americans saw their speech curtailed not directly by law, but by companies acting under federal pressure.
The controversy has not only legal but also practical consequences. CISA's credibility is crucial to its effectiveness, yet this involvement in narrative policing has eroded trust. State governments, hospitals, and private partners need CISA to defend against very real cyber threats, but many are now skeptical of the agency's intentions. Trust, once damaged, is difficult to rebuild. This is especially true in the realm of elections. CISA has an essential role in securing election infrastructure. It should be testing voting machines, protecting voter registration databases, and ensuring tabulation systems are secure. Foreign adversaries are constantly probing these systems, and without federal coordination, states would be left vulnerable. Yet when CISA expands into monitoring conversations about ballots, drop boxes, or fraud, it crosses a constitutional line. Speech about elections, even if false, is protected. The government may defend systems, but it cannot police narratives. Senators in confirmation hearings have been emphatic on this point, pressing nominees to commit to abandoning speech regulation and focusing exclusively on technical security. Meanwhile, the threats CISA should be addressing grow more urgent by the day. Ransomware gangs cripple hospitals, sometimes forcing ambulances to divert patients to distant facilities. Water treatment plants face intrusions that could poison supplies. The energy grid is constantly probed by adversaries who dream of plunging cities into darkness. State-sponsored hackers infiltrate supply chains, as seen in the SolarWinds incident, compromising thousands of organizations. These are existential threats to national security, economic stability, and even lives. Cybersecurity is a full-time battle against nation-states and criminal groups who are relentless in their attacks. It is not a realm where resources should be diverted into speech regulation. Every hour CISA spends flagging posts is an hour not spent protecting a hospital, defending a power grid, or hardening a state's election database. The optics of narrative control are particularly damaging. When government documents use such language, Americans understandably recoil. The term calls to mind Orwell's dystopian vision in which truth is dictated by the state. In a free society, truth emerges from open debate, not official enforcement. Even if CISA intended narrative control as a technical term for countering disinformation, its adoption signals a troubling mindset, that it is the government's role to shape public perception. Such a role is not compatible with the First Amendment. Worse, it fuels conspiracy theories, drives citizens toward alternative platforms outside mainstream discourse, and corrodes the legitimacy of democratic institutions. The solution requires a return to fundamentals. CISA must restore its focus to networks, infrastructure, and systems. It must abandon speech regulation entirely. Transparency is key. Any engagement with social media companies must be strictly limited to technical issues like botnets, malware, and phishing, and these engagements must be documented for public oversight. Congress must enforce boundaries with rigorous scrutiny. At the same time, CISA must lean into its true mission of supporting states and communities. Many rural hospitals, local governments, and small utilities lack the resources to defend against sophisticated cyber attacks. CISA has the expertise to help, and by doing so, it can prove its value. Public communication should be factual, technical, and precise, detailing vulnerabilities and solutions, never judging political claims. The broader context, however, is that disinformation is real and damaging. False claims about elections, health, or policy can spread rapidly online. Some argue that government has a duty to intervene. But democracy depends on allowing even false and offensive speech to circulate, because the alternative, government deciding what is true, poses a far greater threat. The paradox is stark. Misinformation undermines trust, yet attempts to control misinformation can undermine liberty. The only sustainable path is to empower citizens with better education, encourage critical thinking, and promote robust civic debate. The cure for bad speech is not censorship, but more speech. CISA's predicament illustrates this tension vividly. On one side are those who fear disinformation will tear society apart. On the other are those who fear censorship will destroy freedom. Both threats are real. But the Constitution is clear. Liberty must prevail. CISA was not created to be an information ministry. It was created to defend America's digital infrastructure from attack. If it recommits to that mission, it can rebuild trust, protect systems, and demonstrate value. If it persists in policing narratives, it risks not only legal defeat but also irrelevance, as Americans seek other avenues for cybersecurity. In the end, the story of CISA is about more than one agency. It is about the future of democracy in the digital age. Can a free society survive the flood of disinformation without handing power to the state to control narratives? Can government agencies resist the temptation to manage perceptions rather than defend systems? These questions will define the coming decades. The stakes could not be higher. If CISA returns to its true purpose, it can serve as a guardian of networks, a protector of hospitals, grids, and elections. If it does not, it risks becoming a symbol of government overreach. The choice before its leaders is clear. Defend systems, not speech. Protect infrastructure, not narratives. By doing so, CISA can help secure both America's digital resilience and its constitutional liberty. At the heart of this debate is a simple truth. America cannot defend its future by abandoning the very freedoms that define it. CISA was built to guard our hospitals, our power grids, our pipelines, and our elections from cyber attack, not to dictate which voices deserve to be heard. The survival of democracy depends not on the government managing truth, but on citizens being free to challenge, argue, and decide for themselves. The internet may be noisy, chaotic, and filled with conflicting claims, but that chaos is the price of liberty, and it is a price worth paying. If CISA recommits to protecting infrastructure while leaving speech to the people, it can restore trust and strengthen the nation it was created to serve. In the end, the message is clear. Defend the systems, preserve the freedoms, and never forget that the First Amendment is not a weakness to be managed. It is America's greatest strength.